Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Super delighted to be here. This is my second year with the Women's Forum, and this year it's gotten even bigger and better. I'm very thrilled to be back in the company of all you awesome women and some very enlightened men. So I have here with me two amazing, really accomplished leaders, and we're going to be spending the next half an hour talking about what inclusive leadership looks like. So first up, I've got, I'm very delighted to introduce Gordon Watson. He's the Chief Executive Officer of AXA. He's also on the group's management committee.
Thank you.
He's had a storied career for 30 years in the insurance sector. He's lived and worked in places as exotic as Nairobi and as happening and bustling as New York, and now he calls Hong Kong home. Outside of work, he does a fair amount of work with boards. He's on the Shared Value Project board, so he's the chair of the Hong Kong board, and he works with private companies to tackle social issues. He's also on the advisory board of Cyberport for FinTech. He's a global Scot. Yes, that's a term. Please Google it. You will learn something new. And is a board member of the Parents Leadership Council for the Boston College. I also have here with me Indra Nui. She doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to try. She flew in all the way from Toronto to join us here today. She's the former chair and CEO of PepsiCo. She was at the helm for 12 years and took a company through a significant period of transformation and growth. Indra, you seem just as busy now. She's on the board of Amazon, a company I love, Schlumberger. She's also on the advisory panel of Temasek. She's on the International Cricket Council's board, and she is with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So that does not sound like a post-retirement life to me. So thank you both so much for making the time. I have a small story on Indra. When I joined the workforce in 2001 was when she became the president of Pepsi. And I joined Citi as a management associate in Chennai. And Chennai is her hometown. And I can tell you this, for the next year, all that the papers did was run articles on Indra Nui. So I think I've read a lot about Indra's leadership style right from the year 2001. So both of you, without further ado, we can start talking about inclusive leadership. We've had a packed day yesterday and today talking about diversity and inclusion and how we can really move the needle. So what I'd love to do is talk about what does inclusive leadership actually look like, why is it important, and what can all of us in this room do, and what advice you have for us. Companies now increasingly talk about diversity. It's no longer something that is strange. People talk about multidisciplinary teams. People talk about different ethnicities, ages, gender. So that gets talked about a lot. But I think what sometimes gets missed in the conversation is how do you put all that together and create really super high-performing teams? And I think the missing element there is inclusive leadership. So I'd like to start the panel by asking Indra this question. So you've been at the helm of Pepsi for 12 years. You're one of the few women for a Fortune 500 company and one of the few people of color. So what enabled you to feel like you belonged when you got there? And was it sponsorship? Was there, how did you feel included? And I think that could be a lesson for all of us as well in terms of you were there for 12 years and really successful.
Thank you for asking that question, and it's great to be here, and thank you to the Women's Forum organization for putting on such a great show. I've always heard about your Deauville conference, and I didn't know anything about the Singapore conference, so it's great to be here. I have to tell you, having been an immigrant and having gone to the United States from India, I always felt I didn't belong because I was so different. And when I graduated from Yale and started to work, I realized that I had to make up for my difference by working harder. So I worked harder than anybody else. I tried to produce a product better than anybody else could produce so that people didn't look at me as a woman of color, an immigrant. They looked at me for somebody who produced a damn good product. So what I didn't have in terms of same appearance or same culture, I made up with extra work. Was that a lot more work than was required? Yes. But I didn't know how else to play the game. Because I'll be honest with you, I dressed weird because nobody taught me how to dress. Now we have dress coaches that teach you to dress. I don't know how to dress. I just looked bad. So I made up for the looks part. I'm serious. I'm being very honest. I made up for that. I made up for the looks part with the brains part. So I just worked hard. And so I created a situation where if you had Indra on the team, you had a good output. And people competed to have me on the team because I did a lot of the work. So in those days, remember, we're talking about 40 years ago. There weren't any women in the workforce to speak of. There might have been in consulting when I started at Boston Consulting Group. It was a very, very small percentage. In the Chicago office, there were 2 or 3 of us women. So it was like clawing for attention all the time. Situation is much different now. And so through the years, it's always been, judge me for my competence. Forget the fact I'm a woman. Judge me for my competence. Because I'm going to do a job better than anybody else, man or woman, can do on the assignment that you give me. And so it reached a point where, people would just say, CEOs would say to me, my bosses who are CEOs would say, if Indra's done a piece of work, don't even check it. Because she's checked it every which way through Sunday, we cannot add any more value to it. I'd beg with them and say, please review this document that's going to the board. They say, if you've looked at it, we can add no more value. So once you get to that part in your life, the rest is a smooth sailing.
Wow. Okay, so judge me for my competence. That's awesome.
But that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, and I think, I want to stick with this point a little bit more, because I think when you think about inclusive leadership today, and, for you, the brand was competence and how well you did something, and you had, CEOs who looked at that and said, let's judge her by her work and not by what she wears or where she's from. What do you think makes for inclusive leadership today? Because the path that you're talking about may not be a path that everyone can follow. So what would be your view of that today?
So the great news is that in today's world, we have the numbers. We have the numbers and we have the statistics that support it. We have more than 50% of college graduates are women. I'm now giving you US numbers. I don't know what the global number is, but more than 50% of college graduates are women. 53% of the top grades are gotten by women. I just saw a statistic today which said 70% of high school valedictorians are women. Yeah. And so inclusiveness and looking at people who are different than us is no longer something that's nice to do. The only way to run a successful company is to hire from the total pool the best and the brightest, because it's an economic necessity, not a nice to do. So that's one part. The second part, and I speak for consumer products companies, the employee base in our company should reflect the consumer base. Okay? The classic example I'll give you is we have a brand in the US called Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima is a pancake mix and things like that. Tasty product. The product skews more African American in consumption. Yet the team had no African Americans. How do you really understand African American consumption habits unless you have people who understand that community on the team? And so I think it's important that your business reflects the consumer base. And so when you put the economic necessity along with your business having to reflect the consumer base, I think you realize that you better open up the company to the best and the brightest and have your employee base reflect the consumer base. And if you did that, you will by necessity build a very diverse workforce.
We'll come back to that in a bit, because I think it's very logical, and we at Facebook also talk about cognitive diversity, and our users, our employee base should reflect the users that we have, which is 2.6 billion people globally. It's just that I think it takes a lot of work to get there and requires senior, real commitment from the top, which is, I think, what you may have done at Pepsi. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I wanted to ask Gordon here, and you have a seat at this table and on this panel, because you've done some pretty amazing things at AXA in Asia. So I wanted to ask you, since you joined in January 2018, what are the changes that you've personally made at AXA in Asia?
Well, thanks, Sandy. It's great to be here. I think most people here think I'm Indra's bodyguard.
There's our conscious bias for you.
So, having a Scottish accent with that program
And all this time I thought I was yours. Okay.
Clearly, diversity, it's a clear strategic priority. It increases performance, collaboration, and innovation. But for me at AXA, before I joined, what AXA did I thought was great. They took this massive, big, bright, shining light and shone it on the company to get all the creepy crawlies and everything coming out, to see where we really were in terms of diversity. And only 16% of the women, 16% of the leaders were female at that time in 2014. So now I can say today in 2019, that has doubled. 32% are now female. And Thomas, who's our group CEO in Paris, has made a commitment by 2023 that there will be parity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very, I don't think it's a bold move, I think it's a correct move. I'm happy to say in Asia, here, AXA in Asia, we have parity almost already. I have 17 direct reports, of which 8 are women and 9 are men.
Lucky you.
Yes.
I know. We didn't have any female CEOs. We now have 4, which is great. And I think judge me by my competency is so true. For me, parity through meritocracy is really what it's all about. And for me, I challenge, many people say it's too difficult, it's too tough to do this. We're in Japan, we can't. So for me, I don't really think it's that difficult. If you look at, Indra mentioned already the number of valedictorians. If you look at the number of people in the last couple of years graduating with masters, I think for every 1 man, it's 1.67 women. You look at the old school, the baby boomers, so it's guys like me. I'm not quite a baby boomer, but, well, I sort of am. But guys like me are moving on, and if we look at the pipeline, I think the pipeline is large. So for me, I don't see why it's so difficult to do it. So if you have the passion and you commit to do it, as Thomas has for the group, we'll achieve that.
So I want to sort of talk about that a little bit more, because I think you already had a pipeline of women that you had met and were an executive sponsor of for many, many years. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your leadership style. What does that look like when you have 8 women and 9 men on your team, when you've actually fostered a culture where you have 4 women CEOs? We talked about this a little bit, in the lounge a while ago, and you had some really interesting stories to share on how you created this culture of a high-performing, inclusive team. Can you share that with the audience?
I think there are many things, but for me, and I don't know if this is a male-female, a gender thing, but for me, I think introversion and extroversion, extroverts talk all the time, and they suck up all the energy, and people start to believe everything they say. Of course, extroverts are very smart too, but I found that the introverts were left, and they had so much to offer. For me to make better decisions, I didn't want to hear from 2 or 3 particularly male people. I wanted to hear from everyone. So I remember in Korea, for example, we had a big compliance issue. It was quite a challenge. And we sat there for about 2 hours, and there was about 3 of us talking, but there was 20 people at the meeting. And then I noticed this woman called Melissa. I'll protect her, she wasn't called Melissa. She, I could see she wanted to say something but couldn't, and I tried to make it a safe environment for her and said, Melissa, have you got anything that perhaps you could add? And within 2 minutes, she described exactly what we had to do. We had wasted like 2 hours talking, people didn't know the subject matter, and within 2 minutes, she told us what to do. The meeting was over, we did it.
And none of the men interrupted her while she was talking?
Sorry?
None of the men interrupted her while she was talking? Did they roll their eyes when she was talking?
But I think that's...
Gordon's standing up for the men now.
Okay. Yeah, I usually say to people like that, sorry for speaking while you're interrupting.
Thank you. Thank you. We need more like you.
But I do think that, you know, as a leader, if you're the chair of the board or you're leading that, you do need to moderate and make sure that those voices, which probably have a lot more to offer in that subject matter, are heard. And I think that we're starting to get that a lot more at AXA. And I was fortunate enough, I know a lot of people in the market, and I truly believe in a meritocracy, because I come from Glasgow in Scotland, you know, which is not, I didn't go to Eton, and I didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. And for me, a meritocracy was always so important, and that is the most important thing for me, is to be fair and give everyone the opportunity to be all they can be.
So I think, you know, we talk about meritocracy and being fair, but there's this bit that I think we miss out, which is really around bias. Because in your head, you think you're being fair, and, you know, sometimes you're not. And this is something you talk about a lot, which is really unconscious bias. So in your own leadership journey, how have you sort of made sure at Pepsi you created a culture of inclusive leadership?
Look, I've lived through tremendous amount of unconscious bias. There's a fine line between conscious and unconscious bias. It's bias, whichever way you want to look at it. From rolling the eyes to talking over me, or the best one was, you know, when you say something, it's like, oh God, sounds so theoretical. A guy says this and go, what a brilliant idea. Okay, so you sit there going, okay, what do you do? The next time I had the idea, I'd look at the guy and say, can you mention this? This is the idea. And he said, why can't you say it? Because if you said it, it's brilliant. If I said it, it's not so great. So why don't you go ahead and say it?
Wow.
In front of the boss, I would say this, okay? Because somebody has to
That's a tip for all of us, ladies.
do it judiciously, okay? Once you've established a track record, you can do all that. Don't go back tomorrow and do it. But I think if you've been through the tough times and you've got all the scars to prove for it, you realize that you never want other people in your organization to go through a similar experience. So when you see that experience, you nip it in the bud. So if you see people talking over others, men or women, but typically they talk over women, or the worst one I observe is rolling the eyes when the woman starts talking. They just roll the eyes saying, there she goes again. Why is she so excited? Because she's making a point. Don't say, I'll talk to him outside the meeting. Right there, stop the meeting and say, why are you rolling your eyes? Is there a problem? You know, why didn't you let her finish? Or, I don't find her excited. I find her making a point with great passion, so let her finish. So if you model that sort of behavior in the boardroom, in the meeting rooms, you're actually sending a signal to the whole company that the leader will not tolerate bad behavior. And it's not just me. All your direct reports should model the same behavior. If that behavior cascades down the company, we have a chance that the culture of the company could change. If that doesn't happen and all these conversations happen in private, and then behavior doesn't really change, people think they have a license to behave badly.
So feedback in the moment, and I think that's really
Critically
powerful.
important.
And calling out bad behavior when you see it. And we talked about also training a little bit. And I think this is more powerful because you can do a whole bunch of trainings, but if that doesn't affect change, that's just wasted effort.
I think we all go through training of our employees, inclusion training, level 1, level 2, level 3. But many people who go through the training look at it as a chore because we force them to go through it. The only value to the training is if we stop the bad behavior in day-to-day management of the business. Because if you go through the training and tick the box saying you've gone through the training, but then tolerate the bad behavior, it doesn't really work.
And I've seen this firsthand at Facebook. 100% of our senior leaders all go through managing bias training. But it's actually putting that training into use, which is what we do, which actually drives the real change in the company. So I've worked in banking for a long time, and I've worked at Facebook for 3.5 years, and that's the difference that I see. The training's actually, implemented in everyday situations. Gordon, a question for you, actually, moving to Gordon, really around We talked about AI taking away jobs in this conference. We talked about 80% of the coders being white male who are actually building these products. We talked about what could happen, which is real-world harm when bias creeps in, which is, for example, cars, the airbags being designed for men and not for women. Right? And those are real-world harm situations. So all of this is bias creeping in ways that we would have never even imagined. At the same time, technology can also be an enabler. And I think I shared with you this example of a colleague of mine who underwent a training for inclusion where she actually wore a VR headset and lived the experience of a minority group. And that was so powerful for her because she didn't know what it felt like, and then she was experiencing it firsthand. So the question that I have for both of you really is, what role can technology play in supporting inclusion, and what are your thoughts around this? Either of you can go first.
Yeah, I'd just like to add in the culture. The behaviors become the culture, and for me, I like to keep it very simple. So our culture is, you can say anything to me as long as you say it with respect. And that is what the culture we have with each other. So if we have that, that is a very simple mantra, and we try and live by that. In terms of technology, I mean, for me, technology, we're all extremely busy people. We're multitasking. Someone's on their phone over there at the moment. We just do that. So how can technology help us there? So we've come up with what we think is a kind of iconic chatbot, an e-concierge, all in one place, where in insurance, all of the policies for the family, this chatbot can answer the questions you have in each of those policies. We make it easy to claim because people are busy, and that is usually the women in the household who look after all of this. So we try to do that so that you can live the rest of your life. But what we did was, our last app that we tried to do something similar got a very poor rating in the App Store. It was so poor, I'm not going to tell you what it was. So what we did this time is we got people, a very, very diverse group, and people from all around the world. It's been piloted in Hong Kong, but people from all around the world of different backgrounds to really represent our customers and who they are. And we've had hackathons to really come up with ideas, what's really important and what's not important. So it's just been launched over the last 3-4 months, but already we have a 4.2 rating in the App Store, and 25% of our health claims through the employee benefits is actually through this chatbot already. So we're using technology. We're using the engineers that you spoke about that are mostly male. We have other engineers, but we have consumer advocates all in the same room talking about what's important, what's critical, what's not. And I think we've come up with something that's, it's very embryonic. I wouldn't say it's so special yet, but I really think that can really be something very special. And of course, Emma is female. So actually, maybe I do have parity of Emma, 9 and 9.
Yeah, before that it was called the AXA chatbot, right? That didn't work as well.
It was called My AXA, but that was, we tried to personalize it and humanize it.
So that's a great example of how you actually used inclusion to actually drive product change. We also have something called an empathy lab at Facebook, where we try and live the experience of somebody who cannot see how do they experience our products, and build products for that population. So things like that actually move the needle for us in terms of how we think about building products. Indra, your thoughts on technology and inclusion?
I would actually use technology differently. Technology for training, it's okay. I mean, you can put a VR glass on or get a bunch of actors to act out different scenes on what happens when you have discrimination in the workplace. But I think there's a different way to use technology. I mean, for example, the biggest problem we have is we have enough women coming into the workforce. Then levels 2 and 3, we lose most of them. That's where the pipeline is broken. And the reason the pipeline is broken is because if women choose to have a family and choose to work, it's very hard to manage all of these competing priorities. So the real question is, how can you use technology strategically so that you free up more time for women to be able to do a job and to, come home and have a family. Clearly, things like Amazon have helped because it's taken away all of the drudgery of shopping, and with a swipe, you can get a lot done. I think all of these devices can go 2 or 3 steps further. I mean, one example that always intrigues me, and I'll give you a US example because it's something I'm deep in the middle of right now. Most of you, if you've heard of the Alexa device, right? When a child is born, it's registered in the hospital, and everybody knows that there's been a child that's born on this date, this address. It's very easy for Alexa to tell you at 6 months, Mrs. Nui, your child needs a vaccination. And incidentally, I've already called the pediatrician and made the appointment. The following 3 slots are available. Which one do you want? So I don't have to, I used to worry about all that. Alexa takes care of that for me. It can also say, there are 5 other households in the neighborhood that need to get vaccinated. We can get the mobile van for you Wednesday at 3 o'clock.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, can you think about the possibilities? If we can get all of the companies in Silicon Valley or the West Coast to think about all the processes that women and young families go through to manage a job and a family, and think about how to remove the burdens on those processes and make that easy, I think we can free up a lot more time, like Amazon did with shopping, free up a lot more time so that we can give people back the gift of time to be able to do whatever they want to do. So I think technology has just begun to scratch the surface. There's a lot more that can be done, a lot more.
I'm glad you're on the board of Amazon. I'm looking for my chores to get outsourced a lot more now. But it's true, technology is also a great leveler. And markets, even in Southeast Asia, where we see in Indonesia, more women are using platforms like ours to set up small businesses, to sell, to have a career, which wasn't possible before. So I completely buy that point. I had another question for you, Indra. You're now on boards, and I think if you look at the stats in Asia, some countries are ahead of the others, but a lot of the discussion yesterday was really around women on boards and what can we do to move the needle there, because that's another way to affect to have a voice in leading a company. One really interesting point of view was, don't join a board if you're the token woman on the board, if you're the first. Put your foot down and say, I will not be on this board as the first diversity hire for your board. So what are your thoughts around women on boards? And I'll give you the stats. I think Singapore is at around 15% women on boards here. I think the latest diversity report just came out. But many markets are sub 10%. I think Hong Kong we spoke about. So any thoughts you have on what we can do to get more women on boards?
I actually believe when they mandated women on boards in countries in Europe, it was a good thing. Nobody likes quotas, nobody likes mandates, but sometimes you've just got to get a critical mass of women in to be able to sort of recruit and hire more women. The problem is that we don't have enough women at the top levels to put them on boards. So it's a vicious circle, because if you don't have women going up the pipeline, you don't have women at the top, you can't put them on major boards. On a lot of small companies, you have women on boards, but you need them in the big S&P 100, the Fortune 100 companies, you need women on boards. And the same women keep showing up on boards again and again. So I think in the early days, it's okay to have the mandates. It's okay to say you've got to have at least 30% of your board be women by 2022. It's okay for investors to say that, so that you get a critical mass and then build from there. Because when you're the first woman on a board, it's back to square one, because there again, people talk over you, they roll their eyes when you speak. So to be the first woman on a board, you've got to have incredible courage. Then you sit there going, why am I doing this? I've got a company to run, or I've got a job to do. Why am I bothering being on the board and having to put up with what I have to go through? So I think mandates and some sort of a requirement to increase your female representation or minority representation is a good thing. And then you build from there. The thing to be very careful about is, when you're a woman on the board, don't try to act like an alpha male. Because some of the women that I've seen on boards try to err on the side of being more neutral and more male than the women themselves. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't try to blend into a point where we forget that we also have to represent women on the boards.
In fact, somebody yesterday made this really awesome point. If you end up being the only woman on board, don't leave by being the only woman on the board. Make way for another person to join. So I think that's fair. That was fair. And AXA now talks about parity, right? You said in 50% by 2023. I think that's another example of a number statement. And I'm a big believer in a quota to begin with.
But I think competency is very important, as you spoke earlier. And that's why, Diana David at the Financial Times, for example, has started this course in, non-exec training. And I actually attended that myself. You can get a kind of mini degree in it. I just did the 2 days. But most of the people at the course I attended were female. And I think that really would be a catalyst, because many people, when they go on boards for the first time, are not really equipped, don't really know what to do. So if you get that accreditation, and I think women are, we've just had the statistics on women being smarter than men in terms of academia. If you can really have that competency, that's really what would be a catalyst in a true meritocracy.
Awesome. The problem, Sandhya, is that women enter these organizations, these roles with great confidence. But when you have some sort of a bias, it attacks your confidence. Once it attacks your confidence, it takes away your competence. So it's a vicious circle. So it's very, very important that you don't bring the women in or the diverse people in and then work hard to strip their confidence away by not letting them speak or ignoring them when they make a point, and always lauding the men when they make a point and almost just dismissing women's points of view. So I think the whole culture in the boardroom has to change.
The reason I keep looking over is I want to be on time. But I wanted to ask you, I think the point around bias actually impacting competence and then stripping away your confidence is true. So my last question to both of you, and I have one more for you, Indra, if you have time, would be, we have a lot of corporate leaders in the room here today. What tips would you give them? You run a large company, you've run a large company before. What can they do? Maybe 3 things that they could do to be a lot more inclusive in their behavior and that they could walk away with.
We've a poet in Scotland, Robert Burns, to see yourself as others see us. And I think you really need to be honest about where you are. Because most people, as I said at the beginning, we think we're much better than we are. So really have a clear benchmark of where you are today. Because if you don't have that, then you'll never be great if you really want to be a great company. So I think you need to shine the light. You need to be committed. And, in AXA, in our culture, we have a bias for action. Many people just talk. I think, Indra, you said, or Sandhya, we need to walk the talk. So for me, we have to do it. And that's the main piece of advice. Know where you are, know where you want to be, but start the journey. You may make mistakes, but I just see too many people talking about it and not actually doing it because they think it's too difficult, and it's always easy to find an excuse.
What gets measured gets done. That's true. At least get started on the journey and know the baseline.
Yeah.
I actually want to credit my predecessor, Steve Reinemund, who was CEO before me, for all the work that we did in diversity and inclusion, because he said something very important and he practiced it. He said, we're not going to have a successful D&I initiative in PepsiCo and really improve the numbers if we don't force it into the company. You need the critical mass of people. So he put a scorecard in which said, parity hiring, parity promotions, parity retention. He said, if you're going to hire 100 people, 50 of them better be diverse. I don't care where you find them. If you can't hire 50% diverse people, we're not going to do the recruiting. So by department, when that got translated, if you needed to hire 4 people, at the same time you need to hire the diverse people, not say, I can't find them, give me some more time. They had to be hired at the same time. If somebody was getting promoted, promote a diverse person along with them. And if somebody left the company, equality, because I don't want all the diverse people coming in and then leaving the company. Now, people hated Steve for that scorecard, including myself, because it was hard to find the people. But that was the best thing he did for the company because it allowed us to bring a critical mass of people in. And once you had the critical mass, it changed the culture of the company. It forced us to think about how we behaved, how we interacted with each other. It forced us to think about everything differently. And even though we modified the scorecard going forward, the numbers in PepsiCo jumped a lot. Once we had the numbers, we had the voices. And so the culture changed completely.
And that's phenomenal. So one, you start by measuring. Two, you put in place the right KPIs and scorecards. And from just experience, even at Facebook, the one other thing that I would add is publish those stats. I think it holds you to a higher level of transparency. So we publish our diversity report every year. And the parity bit also resonated so much because I think pay parity is another one. I think California's passed a law now. So those kinds of big institutional changes will also make a difference.
Isn't it sad we're still talking about pay parity?
Still 70 cents
Really,
to
really
the dollar.
unfortunate, yeah.
Yeah, my last question's for Indra. I know you're writing a book. We just heard your live stream from Toronto at the Fortune conference, and you're writing a book on work-life balance. That's what you mentioned in the conference. So can you share what prompted you to write it and what you think will come out of it?
So it's not about work-life balance, because it's about how do you integrate
I got that wrong.
family and work in the 21st century. Because, we want women to have, or we want young people to have families. We also want them in the workforce. Yet the pipeline is broken between sort of levels 2 and 3, and people are not bubbling to the top, women in particular. So lots of things have to change in society. Clearly we talked about the bias, but the whole care equation has to change. How do we take care of the child care issue and then elder care? Because many of us have aging parents, and how do you take care of both simultaneously? How do you design communities where multi-generational families can live together? How do you design flexibility into the job? The job was created for a 9-to-5 work day where the men went to work and the women stayed at home. This is a very different world. How do you redesign the workforce or the day? How do you deploy technology more strategically? And then how do you design on, off, on ramps? So when people do take time off, how do you get them back into the workforce? So all the books that have been written so far have been point solutions on one issue. Make a better checklist, lean in. Those are all very important. But I think it's time to pull them all together and say, all of these have to work if we want to tap into all of the resources of society. And so writing this ambitious book, it'll come out sometime in 2021. And it's not a book for me, it's a book for all of us. So as I said in Toronto, there will be criticism when the book comes out, because there's always going to be criticism. In Facebook, I hope you'll stop the criticism, because you cover. And then all of you here in this room, start getting on Facebook and saying, this is the book we wanted.
I didn't ask for that plug. That was all Indra. But thank you both, and we are just on time. Really such an honor to be on this panel with both of you, and
Thank you.
Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Gordon.
Good job.